He stood in the doorway, rain soaking through his hat, a wedding ring clutched tight in his palm. Her silhouette flickered in the firelight, still, silent, and pale as the linen draped over her brother's cot. "You never loved me," she said. Voice cracked but calm, like a wind before a storm. He couldn't answer. Not with words. The truth hung between them, bitter as gunpowder. Behind her, her brother coughed, deep, rattling, weaker than before. She didn't look back. Instead, she stepped closer, took the ring from his trembling hand and whispered, "You thought I'd trade myself for a promise, for pity?" His lips parted, but again nothing came out. Because what could he say? He never meant to hurt her. He just wanted to help the boy. That was all. That was the deal. But now, everything was broken. She dropped the ring onto the floorboards. It rolled until it hit his boot with a soft metallic tap. "Next time," she said, tears now streaking her cheeks, "come with love, or don't come at all." And she walked out into the rain, barefoot and burning with the truth. Before we jump back in, introduce yourself and where you're tuning in from, and make sure you're subscribed to Old West Stories, where every sunset has a secret, and every love story leaves a scar. Dust Hollow wasn't marked on most maps. The wind did the naming here, etching grief into the ground, scratching loneliness into the shutters of broken buildings, and howling through the gaps in the church steeple like a spirit that never quite found rest. It was the kind of town where nothing new arrived, except trouble, and everyone knew her name. Mara Ellison. She lived in the stone cabin just past Widow's Ridge, where the land dropped into the ash-colored canyons and the pines grew like crooked fingers. Folks said the earth out there didn't grow anything but silence. They said a woman like her had no business being alone in a place like that. But she had no choice. Every morning Mara walked the same dirt road into town, limping ever so slightly, her left foot dragging just enough to mark her path like a slow, deliberate ghost. No one dared meet her eye. Not because she was cruel, but because she reminded them of pain, of bad luck, of what happens when love doesn't last. She was 28 and already dressed like mourning was a second skin. Black shawl, gray dress, hair pinned in the same braid every day. The scar on her cheek was faint now, but back when it was fresh, it had shone like a cruel red ribbon. Folks remembered the blood, the screaming, the fire that took her husband, and her hearing. Mara couldn't hear much. Not thunder, not the church bells, not even her brother's soft breathing when he slept. But she could feel things, the vibration of hooves miles off. The weight of eyes on her back when she passed the saloon, the hush that fell like dust behind her footsteps. They didn't need to speak. She knew what they said. She cursed him, that husband of hers. She should have died in the fire, not him. God took her sound for a reason. Mara said nothing. She never did. She only came into town for supplies, for medicine, and for news about the weather, because her brother Jonah needed her. At 12 years old, he was all bones and fever now, lungs filling with something no doctor could name, and every cough sounded like a clock ticking down. She'd sold her wedding dress, her ring, her mama's locket, even her horse. And still, the boy coughed. Her world had shrunk to a one-room cabin, a sickbed, and a wood stove that never seemed to burn hot enough. There were no friends to lean on, no hands that reached for hers. Just whispers behind curtains and the long echo of poor girl that followed her home like a ghost that pitied her. Sometimes, Mara forgot the sound of her own voice. She spoke, only with her eyes now, sharp, tired, and always scanning. She'd learned to read lips as a child, but now it was second nature. People couldn't hide behind words when she was watching. She saw their guilt, their fear, their shame, and they hated her for it. Once she had been joyful. She remembered dancing in the kitchen. She remembered singing. But that version of her died in the fire too, along with her husband's laughter and the future they'd never get. Now there was only survival. And Jonah. He was the only thing keeping her from sinking into the cold quiet of forgetting. She brushed his hair back each night, wiped the sweat from his brow, and whispered prayers she couldn't hear. Not because she believed anyone was listening, just because that's what big sisters did. She'd grown used to hunger, to loneliness, to being stared at like a wound that hadn't healed. But that morning, just 1 week before the storm and the wedding ring, something changed. A rider stopped outside her cabin, not with threats or money or salvation, but with a question she didn't expect. "I want to marry you." Mara didn't laugh. She just studied his lips, then his face, as if looking for the trap. He was handsome, in a worn, weather-bitten sort of way, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man folks listened to without needing to raise his voice. She remembered seeing him in town once or twice, quiet, serious, never cruel. But she didn't know his name. Why? She signed with her fingers, slow and direct. His answer was simple. "Because I heard about your brother. And I know you need help." She waited, but he didn't say anything else. Not "I love you." Not "I've admired you." Not even "you're beautiful." Just, "I want to help." It wasn't kindness. Not exactly. It was a deal. He had land, horses, a warm house, and steady work. She had, well, nothing, except a sick boy and the weight of a town's judgment pressing her down. She nodded once, not yes, not no, just wait, because her story wasn't over yet, not even close. We've just hit 3,000 subscribers. A big thank you to everyone who's joined the journey. Your support means everything, and if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Join the family. The wind changed the night he arrived. Mara felt it in her bones before she saw him. An unfamiliar stillness just after dusk, when the trees usually groaned with breath and the coyotes cried from the ridge. But that evening, everything was hushed, waiting. She stepped outside with her lantern, the pale flame flickering against her shawl. The sky stretched wide and black above her, stitched with stars, but something in the dark didn't feel like sky. Then she heard it. The hoofbeats, slow, steady, measured. A rider approached from the South Trail, where no one came after sundown, not unless they were lost or chasing ghosts. Mara held her lantern higher, squinting toward the ridge, ready to send the stranger on their way, but he didn't look like someone passing through. He stopped 10 paces from her cabin, dismounted without a word, and raised his hands, palms out, a peace offering. She studied him, tall, not young but not yet weathered, a dark coat dusty from travel, a small scar just under his eye that looked like a half moon. He carried no rifle, only a saddlebags and a rolled-up blanket strapped behind the saddle. His horse, a dark bay, stood silent. "I heard there was work near Dust Hollow," he said, his voice low and even, not forcing friendliness. "Didn't expect to find a house out here." Mara said nothing. She tilted her head and watched his mouth move, the way the words formed. He caught her silence and added, "You deaf?" She nodded once. He hesitated. Then, without mocking or pity, he signed something with clumsy hands. Safe? It was crude, not formal signing, but it was enough to jolt something in her chest. She nodded again, slowly. He lowered his hands. "Name's Elias. I'll keep riding if I'm not welcome." Mara turned and pointed to the stump near the cabin's porch. Her version of sit. Elias looked surprised, but he obeyed. She brought him water, a piece of dry bread. They didn't speak. Again that night. Not with words. He stayed outside, rolling out his blanket by the porch, sleeping beside the fire she stoked without asking. The next morning, he was still there. So was the quiet. Elias didn't ask for charity. He chopped wood, without being told, hauled water from the creek, fixed the leaning fence post out by the ridge before she even noticed it was cracked. He didn't ask questions about Jonah or the limp in her step, and he didn't stare at the scar on her face the way other men did. Instead, he noticed other things, that she carved her spoon handle into little shapes when she was anxious, that she watched the clouds for weather signs, that she read lips better in the morning light than at dusk. They shared silence like a warm coat between them, and sometimes that silence said more than 100 conversations. One morning, while Mara peeled apples for stew, Elias stood by the window watching Jonah sleep. The boy had coughed through the night. His breathing was shallow now, like a candle flickering low. "He's tougher than he looks," Elias said, glancing back at her. "You are too." She met his eyes. For once she didn't look away. But in town, whispers spread faster than prairie fire. They saw the stranger. Some said he was a bounty hunter. Others said he was running from the law. A few muttered that Mara was taking in men now, first one to propose, now another sleeping near her porch. The general store clerk, Mrs. Mather, pursed her lips as Mara paid for flour. "You got company." "Miss Ellison?" she asked, voice honeyed with fake concern. "Folks say there's a man hanging around your place." Mara didn't answer. She simply handed over her coin and turned to leave. "Just be careful," Mrs. Mather called after her. "Not every kind face is a safe one." Mara didn't stop walking, but the words followed her like a burr under the skin. A few days later, Mara returned from town to find Elias cleaning her rifle on the porch. "I didn't touch the trigger," he said as she froze. "Just cleaned the barrel. You got coyotes near the ridge." She stood still, tension in her shoulders. He set the rifle down gently. "You don't trust me, I get that." She took a long breath, then pointed to her eyes, then his. "I see everything," her gesture meant. He almost smiled. "Fair." Then he signed back, slower this time. "I see you, too." It rained that night. The fire inside the cabin crackled low, casting soft orange light across the room. Jonah slept fitfully. Mara sat beside the stove, drying her shawl, while Elias sat near the door, reading an old weather-worn book he'd pulled from his saddlebag. She watched him, noticed the way he furrowed his brow at certain words. The way his lips moved silently as he read. The small flick of his finger when he turned each page, deliberate, careful, like someone who knew how to handle fragile things. "You always pass through towns without names?" she asked, signing it slowly. He looked up. "Only the ones that feel forgotten." She tilted her head. "And do we feel forgotten here?" Elias shrugged. "No, just hidden." That word, hidden, sat heavy between them. He leaned forward, his face lit just enough for her to see the seriousness in his eyes. "You think you're invisible out here, but people see you, Mara. They just don't know what they're seeing." She looked away, unsure what to do with that. He didn't push, just went back to his book. 3 nights later, trouble came. It started with a rider seen galloping through town, fast, reckless, drunk maybe. He asked about Elias, described him in detail. When no one answered, he spat in the dirt and rode off. But the message was clear. Someone was looking for him. That night, as the wind howled outside and the shutters creaked against the walls, Mara finally asked, "What are you running from?" Elias didn't flinch. "My brother," he said. "He's worse than I ever was." "Outlaw?" He nodded. "And he knows I turned on him, testified, helped the law catch him. He escaped 2 months ago." She took that in. "And you came here, why?" "Didn't know I was coming here. Just rode until it felt right to stop." She stared at him a long time. "You brought danger here." He didn't deny it. "I'll leave," he said, "before it gets worse." But Mara shook her head. "No. If it's coming, we face it together." The wind outside howled harder now, slamming a shutter open with a sharp crack. Elias stood and secured it while Mara walked to Jonah's bedside, smoothing his damp hair. They were quiet for a long time. Then Elias spoke softly. "You ever think some folks aren't meant to be saved?" Mara didn't answer with words. She just placed a hand over Jonah's chest, then over her own, and finally, on Elias's heart. She didn't need sound to make her meaning clear. We save each other, or we don't survive at all. The town meeting wasn't for her, but they made sure she was there. 2 men from the church had come on horseback that morning, stern-faced, gloved hands twitching on their reins. They didn't knock, just shouted from the path until she opened the door. Jonah was asleep, his fever spiking again. Elias stood on the porch, jaw tight. "Town wants to speak," one of the men said, "and she ought to be there." She didn't answer, just looked to Elias. He signed low. "I'll go too." They gathered in the churchyard just before noon. Wind whistled through the warped fence posts. The townsfolk stood in a half circle, tight, cold, suspicious. Mrs. Mather stood near the front, arms crossed. Sheriff Wilkes, tall and sharp-eyed, stood in the middle. Mara stood behind Elias, but not hidden. Wilkes didn't waste time. "We got word someone's been snooping around again," he said, asking questions about a man riding with a limp in his left knee and a scar under his eye. He looked straight at Elias. "That you?" Elias nodded once. "It is." Murmurs. Someone spat in the dirt. Wilkes continued. "Your brother escaped from federal custody, killed a deputy and vanished. Word is he might be heading west. You reckon he's coming here?" "I don't know," Elias said. "But he might." More murmurs. A woman gasped. Mrs. Mather raised her voice, her eyes cutting to Mara. "And what happens when he gets here, Sheriff? You planning to protect them over us?" Sheriff Wilkes didn't answer. Mrs. Mather kept going. "She's already cursed that one. Death follows her like a stray dog. First her husband, then her hearing, now this outlaw's shadow. I say she's bringing the devil straight to our door." The words hit Mara like a slap. Wilkes sighed, then turned to Elias. "I'm not asking you to leave, but you stay at your own risk. And if your brother comes, we won't hesitate." Elias gave a nod. "Understood." Mara turned to leave, but Mrs. Mather wasn't finished. "Funny how quick you took up with a strange man, Mara. Guess the fire didn't burn all the shame out of you." The crowd didn't laugh, but the silence was worse. Mara froze. Her heart pounded. Elias started forward, but she held out her hand. No, she walked away alone. She didn't speak on the way back, not to Elias, not to herself. Just walked, stiff-legged, holding her shawl close. Jonah's medicine clutched in her hand like a weapon. By the time they reached the cabin, her breath came short. The fever in her brother's chest hadn't broken. The fire inside her was flickering too. She spent that night pacing, watching the snow fall outside, listening to Jonah breathe in shallow rasps, and at dawn, she was gone. Elias woke to an empty cabin. Her coat was missing. So was the lantern. Tracks in the snow led east, toward the river, where the cliffs dropped and the wind never stopped howling. He didn't call out, just saddled the horse and followed. Mara ran until her lungs burned. The cold didn't touch her, not really. Not the way the voices did. Cursed, shameful, devil. She found the old overlook where she and her husband used to watch the sunrise. The rocks were slick with ice. Below, the river thundered between canyon walls. She stood at the edge and let the wind whip her hair, her face, her thoughts. She didn't plan to jump, but she didn't plan to return either. She sank to her knees, fists in the snow, the medicine bottle cold in her hand. She couldn't save Jonah, couldn't hear his cries, couldn't stop the town from seeing her as poison. She screamed, or maybe she didn't. She couldn't hear it either way. An hour passed, maybe more. Then she felt it, not noise, but presence. Elias didn't speak, just knelt beside her. He didn't touch her, just sat there, knees bent, elbows on his thighs, watching the river below, letting the silence settle. After a long while, he pulled something from his coat and placed it gently in. The snow between them, a small wooden carving. Rough, imperfect, a wolf maybe. Or a dog. She recognized it. He'd whittled it over the past week, always tucking it away when she came near. "I made it for Jonah," he said, not expecting her to reply. "But maybe it's for you too." She looked at the carving, then him. "Why?" She signed. He shrugged. "You don't give up. That matters." She shook her head. "I do. I'm giving up now." He paused, then signed back, slower, more precise than before. "Then I'll stay until you don't." Her throat tightened. Tears spilled hot on her cold cheeks. She turned away, ashamed. Elias stayed, said nothing, just sat beside her while the snow fell. They walked back as the sky dimmed, her feet numb, her breath shallow. When they reached the cabin, Jonah was still asleep, curled toward the wall. The fire had burned low. Elias didn't try to warm her, didn't force a conversation. He just added wood to the fire, then sat near the door again. Like always, watching, guarding, present. That night, Mara slept without dreams. The next morning she woke before dawn. Jonah coughed, sharp, wet, painful. She wiped his brow and gave him the medicine she almost lost in the snow. Her hands didn't shake this time. She turned toward the window. Elias was outside, chopping wood, his breath rising in steam, his coat dusted with frost. She watched him, then opened the door and stepped out. He looked up, eyes tired but warm. She signed something new. "Thank you." He nodded. No smile, just a slight exhale, like he'd been holding it in. Later that week, the snow thickened. Storms rolled in. Elias stayed, silent and solid, like a stone that wouldn't crack. The townsfolk stopped whispering, not because they believed her, but because she'd stopped listening. The storms passed in March, and the land softened. Mara stood at the edge of her porch, eyes narrowed against the sun as it broke over the ridge. The thaw had begun, and with it, something else. The subtle pulse of life returning. Sap in the trees, grass waking up. Jonah's fever broke. He sat up that morning and asked for Stu and Elias. He was still there, quiet, unassuming, present. She had begun to hear him in her own way, not with ears, but with the way he stayed. By late spring, the town stopped watching. They had other concerns, a blight hitting crops, a drunkard's brawl outside the saloon, a shipment of lumber delayed by a week. Life moved on, and Mara was no longer the center of whispered judgment. She returned to the market, not all at once. She went first in the early mornings, then once at midday. The baker's boy smiled at her without malice. An old woman slipped her a sack of dried fruit with a nod. The seamstress gave her a roll of fabric, saying, "For Jonah," as if it explained everything. She never heard the words, but she saw the faces. The town slowly was forgetting how to hate her. The land around her cabin stretched far and wide, backed by hills, fed by a shallow stream. Elias noticed first. One morning he pointed to a patch of grassland near the tree line. Good place for a corral. She nodded. 3 days later he began clearing the space. She joined him. They worked without a blueprint, just instinct and grit. Mara remembered the tools her father had used, long before her husband came and silenced her world. Elias remembered how fences went up on the edge of New Mexico, where he used to help break mustangs as a boy. They weren't building a ranch, not yet, but they were building something, a gate, a fence, a fire pit with flat stones they scavenged from the riverbank. She mended saddles. He trained the horses to trust her touch. By summer, it was more than a cabin. It was a home. At night, they sat by the fire, Jonah tucked in behind, the curtain, his thin chest rising steady now. Mara stitched. Elias whittled. Sometimes she caught him watching her, not lust, not pity, just a calm, quiet watching, like he saw her fully, not despite the silence, but because of it. She signed to him one night. "What do you see when you look at me?" He didn't answer at first. Then, slowly, someone who stopped waiting for permission. One afternoon, a rider came. He didn't knock, just sat there on a black gelding, dust rising around him like a storm cloud. He was younger than Elias, but bore the same eyes, dark, guarded, a little hollowed by life. Mara opened the door. Elias came out behind her. The man didn't smile. "Eli," he said. "Jesse, you gonna let me in?" "No," Elias said. Mara could see it then, the wound. Behind the man's voice, the frayed edge of kinship turned bad. "Didn't kill that deputy," Jesse said after a long pause. "Not like they say." You ran, that's enough. I ran because I'm not stupid. Elias said nothing. Jesse's gaze moved to Mara. He tipped his hat. This her? Mara didn't flinch. Elias stepped forward. You're not staying, Jess. I'm your blood. You're also the reason they almost ran her out of town. Jesse's face darkened. They'll come for me eventually. I got nothing to lose. Thought maybe you'd remember what that felt like. Elias didn't budge. Mara stepped beside him, signed clearly, leave. Jesse stared at her hands, then her face, then back at Elias. Then he nodded. Always did pick the hard road. He turned his horse and rode off into the dusk. Elias sat by the fire that night, jaw clenched, hands idle. She knelt beside him, pressed her fingers to his. What will you do? He shook his head. Can't protect him. Not anymore. And you? He looked at her. The fire crackled between them. I'm not running. Not from this. Not from you. The next week, 2 deputies arrived. They asked after Jesse. Elias didn't lie. He came. He left. They lingered, watched, took note of Jonah's illness, Mara's limp, the corral half-built with rope and cedar. One said, "This your place?" Elias looked to Mara. She stepped forward. Signed, "Ours." The deputy raised a brow. "You build this together?" Elias nodded. The other said, "Then we'll let you be, for now." Later that night, Elias found her outside. She was rubbing oil into the saddle leather, the stars above her clear and sharp. He knelt down, hands folded. "There's a choice," he said. She looked at him. "I can ride south, testify for Jesse, or let it die, and stay here." She signed. "What do you want?" He hesitated. Then, "To stay, but not if I leave parts of me unfinished." She nodded once, then again, and signed something he didn't expect. Then go. But come back. He left at dawn, didn't say goodbye with words, just pressed her hand and rode off into the gray. 3 weeks passed. Mara kept the fire lit. She taught Jonah how to spot when the fence needed fixing. She tamed a skittish mare they named Willow. She walked through town and bought nails, cloth, apples, and every night, she sat by the fire with one extra blanket beside her, waiting. He returned on a foggy evening, mud on his boots, a scar on his cheek, but his eyes were clear. He stepped off. The horse walked up the porch and stood before her. She signed, "You came back." He nodded. They cleared him, took time, but I told the truth. She stepped forward, pressed her hand to his chest, then signed something new. "Stay." He smiled. Always. The fire was burning. The fence held. The silence between them no longer meant emptiness. It meant understanding. It meant home. The first frost came early that year. Mara stood in the center of the corral, her breath turning silver in the cold air. Jonah sat on the fence post, legs swinging, scarf pulled up to his ears. He looked healthier now, his cheeks rounder, color back in his skin. The boy who once couldn't stand now chased chickens, grinned crookedly, and asked questions with wild curiosity. Elias brushed down the horses, quiet and steady. Peace had settled over their land, but peace, she knew, was never still. It asked for something in return. The church bell rang at noon. The town had gathered, not for sermon, but for vote. The new mayor had asked for public comment on the landlines, and rumors swirled that Mara's claim and Elias's stay were being questioned again. Someone wanted the corral. Someone else wanted them gone. Old wounds, dressed up in legalities. Mara stood just outside the church, Jonah's hand in hers. She didn't wear black. She wore the same threadbare shawl she always did. Her scar caught the light through the doorway. Inside, folks gathered in rows. Elias was already there, standing in the corner, arms folded, hat in hand. The mayor cleared his throat. "We'll now hear comments on the disputed claim north of Wild Creek. If anyone would like to speak." Elias stepped forward. The room fell quiet. "My name's Elias Granger," he said. "You know my brother. You've heard stories about me, But you don't know her. He turned, eyes settling on Mara at the door. She raised that boy alone. She broke horses and built fences while the rest of us just passed by. You don't have to like me. You don't have to like how we came together. But you're damn fools. If you don't see she's more honest than any man who stood in this room. The mayor shifted. Is she your wife, Mr. Granger? Mara stepped forward then, letting Jonah's hand go. She walked to Elias's side and nodded once. Then signed clearly, slowly. Not yet. A pause. Then she reached into her coat and pulled something out, a folded piece of paper. Her father's land deed, re-signed, witnessed by the old seamstress 2 weeks ago. Elias read the mayor's face. She owns it, has every right. You want to take that? You take it from her hands. The mayor looked at the crowd, saw a few nods, more still. Expressions, a couple of folks averting their gaze, then slowly he said, no objections. They walked out of the church together. No one cheered, but no one spit either. It was a win. Quiet, earned, undeniable. Winter deepened. The ranch took on a golden hue under the snow, like memory made solid. Jonah learned to ride without falling. Mara started baking again. The townsfolk came by, slow at first, asking for trade, sharing news, bringing scraps or seeds. One woman left a bundle on the porch. Baby clothes. No note, just a gift. It happened on a night when the stars came out clean and sharp as nails. Elias had built a fire in the field, just past the new post fence. Mara stood beside him, wool shawl pulled tight, hair plaited down her back. He didn't kneel. He just reached into his coat, pulled out a silver ring, and placed it in her hand. No grand words, no crowd, just this. I want to build the rest of my life beside you. She looked at the ring, then at the sky, then at him. And slowly, she signed, only if it's by firelight. He smiled. Then let's make one burn forever. They wed the next morning. No pastor. Just a circle of stones, Jonah holding a lantern and snow falling light over the frozen earth. The ring fit. His hands shook. Her eyes didn't. He whispered something in her ear she would never tell anyone. She touched his chest where his heartbeat lived. Steady now, no longer haunted. Years later, they would plant cotton near the southern ridge, raise 2 more boys, bury a dog beneath the broken oak, teach Jonah how to hear people even without words. People would come still, asking if the stories were true. If the silent girl with the scar and the outlaw with blood on his name had really carved out a life here, and Mara would just nod, the corner of her mouth rising. Some stories don't need defending. They just need living.